They told us we inherited a worthless Basalt cave, a black hole in the heart of a Montana mountain. They were wrong. That cave didn't save us from poverty. It saved us from the lie that we were never loved. I remember the taste of that morning. Powdered eggs and lukewarm orange juice from a carton. The same breakfast I had eaten for 12 years at the Millbrook County Group home. But that Tuesday in March was different. I knew it would be my last meal in that place. My name is Caleb Thornton. I was 17 years old. And in exactly 43 minutes, I was going to lose the only person in the world who mattered to me. My brother Jonah sat beside me in the hallway outside Mrs. Bellwood's office. He was 16, with our mother's dark hair and a nervous habit of tapping his foot when he was scared. He was tapping now. The sound echoed off the linoleum floors like a countdown. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both knew what was coming. The group home had rules, strict ones. When you turned 17, you could petition for early release if you had somewhere to go. A job, a relative, anything. But Jonah was still 16. He had 11 more months before he could leave. 11 months in a system that had already chewed us up and spit us out more times than I could count. 11 months apart. The thought made my chest tight. I had spent 12 years protecting my brother, sharing my food when his was stolen, taking beatings that were meant for him, lying awake at night listening to make sure he was still breathing in the bunk below mine. I had promised myself, promised him, that no matter what happened, we would stay together. And now the system was going to rip us apart. The door to Mrs. Bellwood's office opened. She was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore glasses on a chain around her neck and had a way of looking at you that made you feel like a number on a spreadsheet. Caleb and Jonah Thornton, she said. Not a question. A statement, like we were items on her checklist. We stood up. Jonah's hand found mine. His palm was sweating. I squeezed once, our old signal. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We walked into her office. It smelled like stale coffee and old paper. There were files stacked on every surface, each one representing a kid just like us. A kid the system had failed. A kid waiting for something that would never come. Mrs. Bellwood sat behind her desk and gestured to the two plastic chairs facing her. We sat. The chairs were cold and hard, designed for efficiency, not comfort. Everything in this place was designed for efficiency, even the way they broke your heart. She opened a folder with our names on it. I could see the edges of documents inside. Medical records, school reports, incident files, the paper trail of two lives that had never quite fit anywhere. As you know, she began, her voice flat and practiced. Caleb, you turned 17 today. Happy birthday, by the way. The words landed like stones in still water. No one had wished me happy birthday in 12 years. Hearing it from her felt like a cruel joke. Thank you, I said, because that was what you were supposed to say. According to state regulations, you are now eligible for early release from the group home system. She flipped a page in the folder. However, your brother Jonah is only 16. He will need to remain in state custody until his 18th birthday, or until a suitable guardian can be identified. I felt Jonah's hand tighten on mine. What does that mean? I asked, even though I already knew. It means you will be released today. Jonah will be transferred to the Morrison facility in Helena. It's a larger facility, better equipped to handle his needs for the remaining duration of his custody. Helena. That was 400 miles away. A different city, a different world. No, I said. The word came out harder than I intended. Mrs. Bellwood looked up from her folder. Her expression didn't change. I understand this is difficult, but these are the regulations. There's nothing I can do. There has to be something. I leaned forward in my chair. I can get a job. I can find an apartment. I can be his guardian. You're 17 years old. You have no income, no address, no credit history. The state will not approve you as a guardian. Then what am I supposed to do? Just leave him? For the first time, something flickered in Mrs. Bellwood's eyes. It might have been pity, or it might have been exhaustion. After 20 years in this job, it was probably hard to tell the difference. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, slightly yellow with age, and sealed with a metal clasp. She placed it on the desk between us. This arrived 3 weeks ago, she said, from a law firm in Montana. I was instructed to give it to you on your 17th birthday. I stared at the envelope. I had received exactly 3 pieces of mail in my entire life. A birthday card from a church volunteer when I was 8, a letter from a pen pal program that ended after 2 exchanges, and a postcard from a social worker who forgot my name. "What is it?" Jonah asked. Mrs. Bellwood slid the envelope toward me. "Open it." My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The paper was smooth and cool, expensive in a way that felt foreign. I broke the clasp and pulled out the contents. There were 3 documents inside. The first was a letter typed on official letterhead. The second was a deed. The third was a handwritten note on thin, fragile paper. I read the letter first. The words blurred together, legal jargon I didn't understand. But certain phrases jumped out at me. Estate of Ezra Thornton, sole beneficiaries, 5 acres of unincorporated land. "I don't understand," I said. "Who is Ezra Thornton?" Mrs. Bellwood consulted her folder. "According to our records, Ezra Thornton was your paternal grandfather. He passed away last month. The estate has just finished processing. You and your brother are his only living heirs." Grandfather. The word felt strange in my mouth, like a food I had never tasted. I had always assumed we had no family. Our parents died when I was 5 and Jonah was 4. A car accident, they told us. No relatives came forward, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no one. We were alone. That was the story we had been told. That was the story we believed. "We have a grandfather?" Jonah's voice cracked on the last word. "We had a grandfather this whole time?" Mrs. Bellwood's expression remained neutral. "He was not in a position to take custody. The details are in the file." I picked up the deed. It was dense with legal language, but I could make out the basics. 5 acres of land in Blackstone Ridge, Montana. Unincorporated territory. No structures, no utilities. "What exactly did he leave us?" I asked. "According to the preliminary assessment," Mrs. Bellwood said, "the property consists primarily of a basalt lava tube system." Jonah frowned. "A what?" "A cave," she said. "Your grandfather left you a cave." The words hung in the air between us. A cave. Our entire inheritance was a hole in the ground, a worthless black pit in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. For 17 years I had dreamed of escape, of freedom, of having something, anything, to call my own. And here it was, a cave. But then I looked at the third document, the handwritten note. The paper was thin, almost translucent, and the writing was shaky, like it had been written by someone very old or very sick. 2 sentences. That was all. "My dear boys, I'm sorry. Trust the stone." I read it again, then again. The words didn't change, but something inside me shifted. This wasn't a joke. This was a message. A message from a man I had never met. A man who knew we existed. A man who, for reasons I couldn't understand, had left us everything he had. "Mrs. Bellwood," I said slowly, "if we own property, does that change anything about Jonah staying with me?" She paused. Her fingers drummed on the desk. "Technically," she said, "if you can demonstrate that you have a stable residence and the means to provide for a minor, you could petition for temporary guardianship." My heart started pounding. The property, the land, that counts as a residence? It could, if you can prove habitation and financial stability. But I should warn you, the property has been assessed as geologically unremarkable and essentially worthless. There's no house, no running water, no electricity. It's 5 acres of rock in the middle of Montana wilderness. "But it's ours," Jonah said. "Legally, it's ours." Mrs. Bellwood sighed. It was the first human sound she had made all morning. "Yes," she said, "legally it's yours." I looked at my brother. He looked at me. And in that moment, without a single word, we made our decision. We were going to Montana. We were going to find our grandfather's cave. And whatever it took, we were going to stay together. Mrs. Bellwood processed our paperwork with the same mechanical efficiency she applied to everything. Release forms, transfer of custody documents, a check for $623, our combined savings from 12 years of good behavior bonuses and work programs. $600. the sum total of our worth in the eyes of the state. She handed us a bus schedule and a map of Montana with a red circle around a town called Copper Falls. The property is about 5 miles from there, she said. The roads aren't maintained. You'll have to walk. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. Jonah clutched the manila envelope against his chest like it was a life preserver. Good luck, Mrs. Bellwood said. It was the same thing she said to every kid who walked out of her office. The same practice phrase. But for just a moment, I thought I saw something real in her eyes. Something that might have been hope. We walked out of the group home at 11:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked back at the clock above the front door. I wanted to remember. I wanted to mark the moment when our old life ended and our new one began. The sky was a flat, colorless gray, the kind of sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or not. We stood on the cracked sidewalk with our duffel bags, two boys with nothing but $600 and a deed to a cave. Jonah looked up at me. Do you think it's real? The grandfather, the land, all of it? I didn't know. I didn't know anything. But I knew one thing for certain. It doesn't matter, I said. Whatever's out there, we face it together. He nodded. His foot had stopped tapping. We walked to the bus station. The Greyhound to Montana left at 2:15 in the afternoon. 12 hours to Copper Falls with stops in 6 towns I had never heard of. We bought 2 tickets, one way, and watched our savings drop to $460. The bus was old, with seats that had been patched so many times the original color was impossible to guess. It smelled like diesel and fast food and the accumulated exhaustion of 1,000 journeys. We found seats near the back, away from the other passengers. As the bus pulled out of the station, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched the only world I had ever known disappear behind me. Goodbye, concrete walls. Goodbye, fluorescent lights. Goodbye, powdered eggs and lukewarm juice. I wasn't sad to leave. I was terrified of what came next. Jonah fell asleep after the first hour, his head resting against my shoulder. I stayed awake, watching the landscape transform outside my window. The city gave way to suburbs. The suburbs gave way to farmland. The farmland gave way to rolling hills that slowly grew into mountains. The further we traveled, the emptier the world became. The towns grew smaller and further apart. The roads narrowed. The sky opened up into something vast and ancient, a blue so deep it hurt to look at. I pulled out the manila envelope and read everything again. The legal documents were dense and confusing, but I understood enough. Our grandfather, Ezra Thornton, had owned 5 acres of land in a place called Blackstone Ridge. The land had been in the family for 3 generations. When he died, it passed to us. But why? Why would a man we had never met, a man who had apparently known we existed our entire lives, leave us everything he had? And why had he never come for us? Never written? Never called? The handwritten note offered no answers. Just those 2 cryptic sentences. I'm sorry. Trust the stone. What did that mean? What was he sorry for? What stone? I folded the note carefully and put it back in the envelope. Some answers I was beginning to realize could only be found by moving forward. The sun set somewhere over Wyoming, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple that I had never seen before. In the group home, we had windows, but they faced other buildings. I had never seen a real sunset. I had never seen the sky catch fire. Jonah woke up just in time to see the last of the light fade. It's beautiful, he whispered. Yeah, I said. It is. We didn't talk much after that. We just watched the darkness settle over the mountains like a blanket, and we wondered what was waiting for us on the other side. The bus pulled into Copper Falls at 2:47 in the morning. 12 hours of driving, and we had finally reached the edge of our new life. The town wasn't much. A single main street with a handful of buildings huddled together against the cold. A gas station with flickering lights. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign. And a diner called May's Place, with a red neon sign that buzzed and crackled in the darkness. The bus driver opened the doors, and the cold hit us like a wall. Montana cold. Mountain cold. A cold that seeped into your bones and made you understand, on some primal level, that nature was bigger than you and didn't care if you lived or died. We stepped off the bus with our duffel bags. The driver didn't say goodbye. He just closed the doors and drove away, leaving us standing alone on the empty street. The sky was thick with stars, more stars than I had ever seen. In the city, the sky was always a hazy orange blanket. Out here, it was an ocean of cold, distant fire. Now what? Jonah asked. I looked at the diner. The lights were on inside. The sign said, open 24 hours. Now we wait for morning, I said, and we find out how to get to Blackstone Ridge. The diner was warm inside, almost uncomfortably so after the cold. The walls were covered with old photographs and mounted fish, and signs with sayings like, life is better in the mountains, and home is where you hang your hat. There was only one other customer, an old man with a long white beard sitting at the counter. He was stirring his coffee with slow, deliberate movements, like he had all the time in the world. A woman emerged from the kitchen. She had tired eyes but a kind smile, and she was carrying a pot of coffee like it was an extension of her arm. You boys look like you could use this, she said, pouring 2 cups without asking. Thank you, I said. She set the pot down and studied us for a moment. You're new. It wasn't a question. In a town this small, strangers were probably rare. Just got in, I said. On the bus. That explains it. She wiped her hands on her apron. I'm Maeve. This is my place. Well, my husband's place originally, but he passed 3 years back, so I guess it's mine now. I'm Caleb. This is my brother Jonah. Jonah raised his hand in a small wave but didn't speak. He was staring at the photographs on the wall, at the smiling faces and happy families. I wondered what he was thinking. Maeve poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Where are you boys headed? I pulled out the map with the red circle. Blackstone Ridge. We're looking for a piece of property up there. Belonged to our grandfather. The old man at the counter stopped stirring his coffee. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes were a pale, watery blue like faded denim. Blackstone Ridge, he repeated. His voice was low and rough, like gravel in a riverbed. Ain't nothing up there but basalt and misery. Old Ezra Thornton's place. My heart stuttered. You knew him. Knew of him, the man corrected. He kept to himself. Folks said he was crazy. Spent all his time up on that ridge banging on rocks. Died up there too. Took the sheriff a week to find him. The words hit me harder than I expected. Our grandfather had died alone on a mountain, and no one had noticed for a week. No one had cared enough to check on him. He was our grandfather, Jonah said quietly. We never met him. The old man studied us for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. It might have been surprise. It might have been recognition. You're Nathan's boys, he said. Nathan, our father's name. The name we had seen on documents but never heard spoken aloud. You knew our father? I asked. The man shook his head slowly. I knew of him. Ezra talked about him sometimes. And about you two. Said he had grandsons somewhere back east. Said he was going to bring you home someday. The words cut through me like a knife. He was going to bring us home, but he never did. He died on that mountain alone, and we spent 12 more years in the system, believing no one wanted us. Maeve reached across the counter and touched my hand. Her fingers were warm and rough, the hands of someone who had worked hard her entire life. I don't know what happened between your grandfather and your family, she said, but I know Ezra Thornton was a good man, a quiet man, but good. He helped a lot of folks around here over the years, fixed fences, shared his harvest, never asked for anything in return. Why didn't he come for us? Jonah's voice cracked on the last word. Maeve shook her head. I don't know, honey. I wish I did. The old man turned back to his coffee. The road to Blackstone Ridge washed out years ago. You'll have to hike, about 5 miles straight up. Not an easy climb. We can do it, I said. He looked at me again, measuring. Maybe you can, but be careful. He paused, his pale eyes going sharp. There's been folks asking about that property lately. City folks with suits and briefcases. One of them was in here just yesterday. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. What kind of folks? Don't know, but they were asking questions. Where the property was, who owned it, whether it was for sale. He took a sip of his coffee. I told them I didn't know nothing. Figured it wasn't any of their business. I looked at Jonah. He looked at me. The same question hung between us. Who else knew about our grandfather's land? And what did they want with it? Maeve insisted on feeding us before we left. Scrambled eggs and toast and bacon. More food than we had seen in one sitting in years. She wouldn't let us pay, no matter how many times I tried. Consider it a welcome gift, she said. Copper Falls takes care of its own. The old man's name was Henry Dawson, and he drew us a map on a paper napkin, the route to Blackstone Ridge, marked with X's for landmarks and danger spots. Watch for loose rocks near the top, he said, and stay away from the old mine shafts. Some of them go down deeper than you'd think. Thank you, I said. He nodded once, a single sharp movement. Your grandfather was a good man, like Maeve said. Whatever you find up there, remember that. We left the diner as the sun was coming up, painting the mountains golden pink. The air was still cold, but there was warmth in it now, the promise of a day that might not freeze us solid. Jonah carried the map. I carried the manila envelope. And together we started walking toward the edge of town, toward the mountains, toward whatever waited for us at Blackstone Ridge. The hike was brutal. The old road had been swallowed by the forest years ago. What remained was a narrow path, more animal trail than human, that wound up the mountainside through thick stands of pine trees. The ground was rocky and uneven, covered with roots and loose stones that threatened to twist your ankle with every step. Within an hour, my legs were burning. Within 2, I was drenched in sweat despite the cold. Jonah was struggling too, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. But we kept going. We didn't have a choice. The forest pressed in on all sides, a dense wall of green and shadow. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Every now and then, we would hear something moving in the underbrush. A deer, a squirrel. Something larger that we tried not to think about. After 3 hours, Jonah stumbled and fell. I caught him before he hit the ground. His face was pale, his lips slightly blue. He was shaking. I can't, he said. Caleb, I can't. I helped him sit down on a fallen log. I gave him water and the last of the food Maeve had packed for us. I rubbed his hands between mine until the color started coming back. You can, I said. We're almost there. How do you know? I didn't. I had no idea how much farther we had to go. But I knew that if I said that, if I let him see my own fear, he would give up. And if he gave up, we were both finished. I just know, I said. Trust me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. I helped him stand. I took his bag along with mine. And when he couldn't walk anymore, I carried him on my back, one step at a time, up the mountain. That was what brothers did. That was what we had always done. We carried each other when the world got too heavy. We kept moving when everything inside us screamed to stop. We reached the top late in the afternoon. The trees thinned out, and suddenly we were standing on a wide, barren plateau of black rock. It stretched before us like a lunar landscape, flat and lifeless, with nothing but stone and sky. And at the far end of the plateau, carved into the face of the mountain itself, was the entrance to the cave. It was enormous, 20 feet high, maybe 30 feet wide, a gaping black mouth in the solid rock. The stone around it was smooth, almost polished, like the throat of some ancient beast. I set Jonah down. We stood there side by side, staring at the hole in the mountain that was supposed to be our inheritance. That's it, Jonah said. His voice was hollow. That's what he left us? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because looking at that dark, empty opening, I felt something crack inside me. All those years of hope, all those dreams of escape, all those fantasies of family and belonging and home. This was it, a hole in the ground, a worthless black pit in the middle of nowhere. I sank down onto the cold rock, my legs finally giving out. The weight of everything, the years in the system, the long journey, the impossible hope, all of it came crashing down at once. Jonah sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. We just stared at the cave and the vast, indifferent sky above it. The sun was starting to set, painting the clouds in the same oranges and purples we had seen from the bus. It was beautiful, objectively, devastatingly beautiful. But it felt like mockery, like the universe was laughing at us. We should go back, I said finally. Tomorrow morning. We can sell the land, get whatever we can for it, start over somewhere else. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the handwritten note from our grandfather. "Trust the stone," he read aloud. "He wrote that for a reason, Caleb. He wanted us to come here. He wanted us to find something." "Find what? There's nothing here. Just rock." "You don't know that." Jonah stood up. His exhaustion seemed to have vanished, replaced by something else. Determination, maybe, or desperation. "We came all this way. We're not leaving without looking." He started walking toward the cave. "Jonah, wait." But he didn't wait. He kept walking, his footsteps echoing on the black rock, and I had no choice but to follow. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment we stepped inside. The wind died. A heavy, tomb-like silence descended, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Our flashlights were cheap, bought from the hardware store in Copper Falls with some of our dwindling money. The beams were weak, cutting pale yellow circles into the black. The floor was surprisingly smooth, worn down by millennia of water or ice. The walls were columns of dark stone, hexagonal pillars packed together like a giant's honeycomb. Our lights danced over them, revealing shades of gray and black in something that might have been blue. The smell was of damp earth and ancient rock, the smell of a place that had never known the sun. We walked deeper, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. The main cavern was enormous, the ceiling lost in the darkness above our heads. It felt like being inside a cathedral built by a god who had given up on humanity. I swept my light around, looking for anything. A sign of our grandfather, a sign of life. There was nothing, just rock. So much rock. "This is pointless," I said. "There's nothing here." "Wait." Jonah's voice was sharp. He was pointing his flashlight at something. "What's that?" I followed his beam. There, tucked into a deep crevice between two massive basalt columns, was a shape that wasn't natural. A box. My heart started pounding. We scrambled over the rocks to reach it. It was an old military-style footlocker, dark green metal, secured with a heavy padlock. It was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime, but it was unmistakably man-made. Someone had put it here. Someone had hidden it here. The padlock was old and rusted. I looked around wildly, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. My eyes landed on a heavy, sharp-edged rock lying nearby. I picked it up. It was heavy, fitting awkwardly in my hands. "Are you sure?" Jonah asked. I raised the rock over my head. "No." I brought it down on the padlock with all my strength. The clang of rock on metal was deafening in the silence. The lock held. I did it again. And again. My arms burned. Sweat dripped into my eyes. On the sixth strike, there was a sharp crack. The rusted shackle of the lock snapped. It fell to the floor with a clatter. I dropped the rock. My hands were raw and bleeding. I fumbled with the latches on the footlocker. They were stiff, but I forced them open. I lifted the heavy lid, and everything changed. If you've stayed with us this far, I want you to know that what Caleb and Jonah found in that box changed everything they thought they knew about their family. Before I tell you what was inside, I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a secret about your family that rewrote your entire history? Something hidden for years, maybe decades, that suddenly made everything make sense? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. We share stories about hope, about second chances, about finding family in the most unexpected places. Now let me tell you what was in that box. The box was filled with journals, dozens of them, thick, leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with dense, spidery handwriting. The leather was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. They smelled like dust and time and something else, something that might have been tears. On top of the journals was a single thick envelope, sealed with red wax. 2 names were written on the front in the same handwriting, Caleb and Jonah. I sank to my knees. The flashlight trembled in my hand, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the cave. This was it. This was our inheritance. Not the cave itself. This, the story. Jonah knelt beside me. His breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. "Open it," he whispered. I picked up the envelope. The wax seal was old and brittle, cracking under my fingers. I pulled out the letter inside. Several pages, covered in that same shaky handwriting, the writing of someone old or someone dying. I began to read aloud, my voice echoing in the vast darkness of the cave. My dearest boys, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. I know you have questions. I know you must hate me. I pray that by the time you finish reading what I have left for you, you will understand. And maybe, just maybe, you will find it in your hearts to forgive an old man who made a terrible choice for what he thought were the right reasons. I had to stop. My throat was tight. The words were swimming before my eyes. Jonah took the letter from my hands and continued reading. I did not abandon you. I need you to know that. Before anything else, I did not abandon you, and neither did your parents. What happened to our family was not an accident. It was not fate. It was murder. The word hung in the air between us. Murder. The letter continued, and with each sentence, the world we thought we knew crumbled away. Our father, Nathan Thornton, had been an accountant. A good one. Smart, meticulous, honest to a fault. He had gotten a job with a company in Chicago, a company that seemed legitimate on the surface, but was something else entirely underneath. They were laundering money, millions of dollars, for people who did not tolerate mistakes or witnesses. By the time our father realized what he was involved in, it was too late. He had seen too much. He knew too many names, too many numbers. He tried to get out. He gathered evidence. He was going to go to the police. They found out. The car accident that killed Nathan and Rosemary Thornton was not an accident. The brakes had been cut. The crash had been planned. Our parents were silenced before they could talk, but they didn't know about us. We were in the car that night, in the back seat, 5 years old and 4 years old, too young to understand what was happening. The crash should have killed us too. But somehow, miraculously, we survived. Our grandfather Ezra found us before anyone else did. He pulled us from the wreckage. He held us while we cried for parents who would never hold us again. And then he made a choice. The people who killed our parents knew we existed. They would come for us eventually, either to silence us or to use us as leverage. Ezra was just a geologist, an old man who knew rocks better than people. He had no power, no connections, no way to fight them. So he did the only thing he could think of. He made us disappear. He used his life savings to bribe a social worker. He created new identities for us, new names, new histories. He buried us deep inside the foster care system, where no one would think to look for the grandsons of a murdered accountant. He gave up his only son's children to save our lives. The letter went on. Pages and pages of explanation, of apology, of love. Ezra wrote about watching us from a distance, getting secret reports from contacts he had cultivated over the years. He knew when Caleb got suspended for fighting. He knew when Jonah broke his arm at age 9. He knew everything, but he could never reach out, never make contact. It was too dangerous. I have watched you grow from afar, the letter said. I have celebrated your birthdays alone, with a candle and a prayer. I have grieved for every moment I could not share with you. Every Christmas, every first day of school, every skinned knee and broken heart. I wanted to come for you. Every single day I wanted to get in my truck and drive to wherever you were and bring you home. But I knew that if I did, they would find you. The people who killed your parents have long memories and longer reaches. They never stopped looking, and I could not, would not, lead them to you. So I waited, I watched, I prepared. This land, this cave, is not worthless. The official records say it is, because I made sure they would. I filed false surveys. I bribed assessors. I did everything I could to make this place look like nothing but rock and misery. But the truth is in these journals. The truth is in the stone. I have spent the last 12 years mapping every inch of this cave system. I have found things that no one else knows about. Things that will change your lives if you are brave enough to claim them. Be strong, my boys. Find what I have hidden. And know above all else that you were never unloved. You were never unwanted. You were protected. You were hidden. You were saved. I love you. I have always loved you. And I am so sorry. Your grandfather, Ezra. The letter ended there. I sat in the darkness of the cave, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. 12 years. 12 years of believing we were abandoned. 12 years of thinking no one wanted us, no one cared, no one even knew we existed. And all that time, an old man on a mountain had been watching over us, protecting us, loving us from a distance he could never close. Jonah was crying too, silently the way he always cried, the tears running down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking. I pulled him into my arms and held him tight. We sat there in the darkness, two brothers who had finally found the truth about their family. It wasn't the truth we expected. It wasn't the happy ending we had dreamed of. Our grandfather was dead, our parents were murdered, and somewhere out there, the people who had destroyed our family were still alive. But we were not alone. We had never been alone. And that, in that moment, was enough. We searched the footlocker more carefully, going through every item with trembling hands. Beneath the journals wrapped in oilcloth, we found something else. Letters, hundreds of them. Birthday cards never sent. Christmas letters never mailed. Notes written on scraps of paper, napkins, the backs of receipts. Each one addressed to us. Each one dated. The earliest was from 12 years ago, written just weeks after our parents died. My dear boys, today would have been your first day at your new school. I wonder if you made friends. I wonder if you were scared. I wish I could have been there to hold your hands and tell you everything would be okay. I wish I could tell you that now, but I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Just know that somewhere, far away, your grandfather is thinking of you. Your grandfather loves you. Your grandfather is so, so sorry. The letters continued year after year. Ezra had written to us constantly, pouring his heart out onto paper that would never reach us. He wrote about his life on the mountain, about the cave and its secrets, about the birds that visited his garden and the deer that came down to drink from the stream. But mostly, he wrote about us. He wrote about the reports he received from his contacts. He knew our favorite subjects in school. He knew about the bullies who made Jonah's life miserable. He knew about the time I got into a fight defending my brother and spent a week in isolation. He knew everything. He just couldn't do anything about it. Reading those letters was like being held by someone who had died, like feeling arms around you that weren't really there. It was comfort and grief and rage and love, all tangled together until I couldn't tell them apart. Jonah read over my shoulder, his hand gripping my arm so hard it hurt. He loved us, Jonah whispered. He really loved us. Yeah, I said, he did. We spent the night in the cave, reading the letters by flashlight until the batteries started to die. Then we lay in the darkness, the footlocker between us, and talked about our grandfather, about our parents, about everything we had lost and everything we had found. For the first time in 12 years, we didn't feel alone. The next morning, we hiked back to town. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. Every muscle burned, every joint protested. But I forced myself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, down the mountain and back to Copper Falls. We needed supplies, food, water, better flashlights, camping gear, everything required to survive on a mountain while we explored a cave system that our grandfather had spent years mapping. The town was awake when we arrived, the main street bustling with the quiet activity of a small community going about its daily business. People looked at us as we walked past. Some nodded, others stared. Word had spread. The Thornton boys were back. We went to the hardware store first. The man behind the counter was middle-aged, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they had built things and fixed things and torn things apart. His name tag said, Earl. You're Ezra's grandsons, he said. Not a question. Yes, sir. He studied us for a long moment, then nodded once, a sharp movement that seemed to convey approval. Your grandfather was a good man. Helped me fix my roof after the storm of 2009. Wouldn't take a dime for it. He gestured to the store around him. Whatever you need, I'll give you the family discount. The family discount turned out to be about 40% off. We bought flashlights, batteries, rope, a camping stove, and enough canned food to last a week. Earl threw in a couple of sleeping bags that he said had been sitting in the back for years. Nobody buys sleeping bags in Copper Falls, he said. Everybody already has 3. From the hardware store, we went to Maeve's diner. She fed us again, refusing payment again, and asked how we were holding up. We found some of his things, I said, in the cave. Letters, journals. Maeve's eyes softened. He wrote a lot, Ezra did, always scribbling in those notebooks. I asked him once what he was writing. He said he was leaving a message for someone who hadn't arrived yet. A message for us. A message 12 years in the making. We were about to leave when the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of suit you didn't see in a town like Copper Falls. His hair was slicked back, his shoes were polished, and he carried himself with the confident ease of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. But it was his eyes that made me uneasy. Cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. He glanced around the diner, taking in the decor, the other customers, the two teenagers standing by the counter with duffel bags. His gaze lingered on us for just a moment too long. Then he smiled. A thin, professional smile that never touched his eyes. "Good morning," he said to Maeve. His voice was smooth, polished, the voice of a salesman. "I'm looking for some information about a property in the area, Blackstone Ridge." I felt Jonah stiffen beside me. Maeve's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A subtle wariness. "Can't say I know much about it. You might try the county assessor's office in Helena." "I've already been there," the man said. "The records are quite outdated. I was hoping someone local might have more current information." "Afraid not." Maeve picked up a coffee pot and started wiping the counter. A clear dismissal. "We don't pay much attention to what happens up on those ridges. Too busy with our own business." The man's smile flickered, just for a moment. Then he shrugged as if it didn't matter. "Of course. Thank you for your time." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. His eyes found us again. Caleb and Jonah Thornton, two boys with duffel bags standing in a diner, talking about a dead man's letters. "Nice town you have here," he said. "Very friendly." Then he was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "Who was that?" Jonah asked. Henry Dawson was sitting at his usual spot at the counter. He turned to look at us, his pale blue eyes sharp. "That was one of them. The city folks I told you about. His name's Garrett, near as I can figure. He's been asking around for weeks." Henry's voice dropped. "And he's not the only one. There's another man, higher up. Victor Hale. Drives a black car, wears suits that cost more than my truck. He was here 2 days ago, asking the same questions." "What do they want?" I asked. Henry shook his head slowly. "Nothing good. Whatever it is, be careful. Those aren't the kind of men who take no for an answer." We stayed in town long enough to set up a post office box, our only official address, then headed back up the mountain. The hike was just as brutal as the day before, but this time we knew what was waiting for us at the top. The cave, the journals, the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, we fell into a routine. Days in the cave, exploring, mapping, following our grandfather's detailed notes. Nights reading his journals, learning the language of stone he had spent his life studying. The cave system was much larger than it appeared from the entrance. The main chamber led to a network of smaller tunnels, some of them barely wide enough to crawl through, others opening into hidden chambers that took our breath away. Our grandfather had mapped every inch. His drawings were works of art, filled with notes on airflow, water sources, mineral deposits. He had cataloged everything, from the smallest crystal formation to the largest underground river. He called this place a living library, a record of geological history stretching back millions of years. And somewhere in that library he had hidden something important enough to die protecting. One evening we came back to our campsite and found a letter waiting for us. It was propped against a rock near our tent. A thick, expensive envelope with an embossed logo in the corner. Ridgemont Holdings. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter was typed on heavy cream paper. Legal language, formal and cold. It informed us that Ridgemont Holdings was aware of our recent acquisition of the property at Blackstone Ridge. It cited geological surveys that had flagged the entire area as structurally unstable and prone to collapse. It called the land a liability, a danger, a burden. And then it made an offer, $8,000 for everything. The land, the mineral rights, whatever was in the cave. All of it, $8,000, to two kids who had arrived in town with 460. It was enough to start over, to get an apartment somewhere, to build a life that didn't involve sleeping in a cave and hiking 5 miles for groceries. I looked at Jonah. He was reading over my shoulder, his face pale. "That's a lot of money," he said quietly. "Yeah. What do we do?" I thought about our grandfather's letter, about the people who had killed our parents, about the man named Garrett asking questions in Maeve's diner. Someone knew what was in this cave. Someone wanted us gone. "We say no," I said. We hiked into town the next morning to mail our response. I wrote 2 words on the back of their letter. "No thanks." Then I dropped it in the mailbox and walked away. 3 days later, Victor Hale came to Copper Falls. I knew it was him the moment he walked into Maeve's diner. He was older than Garrett, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. The suit was expensive. The watch was gold. Everything about him screamed money and power, and a complete lack of concern for anyone who got in his way. He walked straight to our table and sat down without asking permission. "Caleb and Jonah Thornton," he said, "I've been looking forward to meeting you." I didn't respond. Neither did Jonah. We just sat there watching him, waiting. Victor signaled to Maeve for coffee. She brought it over without looking at him, her face carefully blank. "My name is Victor Hale," he said, stirring sugar into his cup with precise, deliberate movements. "I represent Ridgemont Holdings. I assume you received our letter." We responded. "Yes. No thanks." His fingers drummed once on the table, then went still. A bit informal, but the message was clear. "Then why are you here?" Victor set down his spoon. "Because I don't think you fully understand the situation you're in. You're 2 children, alone on a mountain, with no resources, no support, and no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." "We're not children," Jonah said. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling under the table. "Legally speaking, you are." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Caleb is 17, still a minor in the eyes of the law, and Jonah is 16, well below the age of independent living. If the state were to become aware of your current living conditions, they would be concerned." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 2 orphans living alone in a cave on a structurally unstable mountain is exactly the kind of situation that Child Protective Services gets very interested in. One phone call, and Jonah could be removed from your custody, sent back into the system, maybe to a different facility this time, one quite far from here." The threat hung in the air between us. Jonah's face had gone white. "You can't do that," I said. "I can, and I will if necessary." Victor's voice was pleasant, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "But I don't want to. I'm not a monster, Caleb. I'm a businessman. I'm offering you a fair deal. $8,000 for a worthless piece of rock. That's more than generous. The land isn't worthless. According to every official survey on record, it is." Victor's smile returned, thin and cold. "But you're young, idealistic. I understand. So let me make you a better offer. $10,000, final offer. Take it, start a new life somewhere warm, and forget this mountain ever existed." I looked at Jonah. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight. "I thought about our grandfather's letter. The people who killed your parents have long memories and longer reaches. They never stopped looking. Ridgemont Holdings, Victor Hale, Garrett, were they connected to the people who murdered our parents? Were they the ones Ezra had been hiding from all these years?" I didn't know, but I knew one thing for certain. "No," I said. Victor's expression flickered. Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Excuse me." "The answer is no. The land isn't for sale. Not for 10,000. Not for 100,000. Not for anything. You're making a mistake." "Maybe." I stood up, pulling Jonah with me. "But it's our mistake to make." Victor's mask of pleasantness slipped away completely. What remained was cold and hard and utterly merciless. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I said. "And I'm not afraid of you." It was a lie. I was terrified, but I wasn't going to let him see that. We walked out of the diner. Behind us, I heard Maeve's voice, sharp and clear. "I think you'd better leave now, Mr. Hale. We don't take kindly to threats in Copper Falls." We didn't look back. That night, I read the final journal. Ezra's handwriting grew shakier as the entries progressed. His heart was failing, he wrote. He knew he didn't have much time. The last few pages were frantic, filled with warnings and instructions. "They're watching," he wrote. "I've seen vehicles on the logging roads, men with binoculars pretending to be hunters. They know I have something. They just don't know what. They think it's money, records, evidence that could send them to prison. They don't understand that the real value isn't on paper. It's in the stone itself. I have to make sure they never find it. I have to make sure it's safe for my boys." And then, on the very last page, a map. It was different from the others, more detailed, more desperate. It showed the deepest part of the cave system, a section Ezra had marked as the heart. And there was a note. The entrance is hidden behind the collapse. The flood of '87 brought down 40 tons of rock and mud. They'll need machines to get through. But a boy with a strong back and a good reason can find another way. Follow the water. The sound will guide you. I looked at Jonah. He was asleep, finally, his face peaceful for the first time in days. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow we would find the heart. Tomorrow we would find whatever our grandfather had died to protect. I want to pause here because I know some of you have been in Caleb and Jonah's shoes. Maybe not exactly, but close. You've been at the bottom, wondering if things would ever get better. You've fought for something that everyone told you was worthless. And maybe, just maybe, you found treasure where no one else thought to look. If that's you, I want you to leave a comment telling me about it. What did you find when everyone said there was nothing there? What did you fight for that turned out to be worth everything? And if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here, a family of people who understand that the hardest roads sometimes lead to the best destinations. Now let me tell you how Caleb and Jonah found the heart. The collapsed tunnel was exactly where the map said it would be, a solid wall of rock and dried mud, stretching from floor to ceiling. The flood of 1987 had brought the mountain down on this section of the cave, sealing it off from the outside world. But our grandfather was right. There was another way. To the left of the rockfall, almost completely hidden by a curtain of hanging moss, was a crack in the wall, a fissure, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I shone my flashlight into the darkness beyond. The beam disappeared into nothing. "Are you sure about this?" Jonah asked. I looked at him, my brother, the only family I had left, the person I had sworn to protect, no matter what. "No," I said honestly, "but we've come too far to stop now." He nodded, and then because he was smaller, because he fit better, he went first. The passage was tight, claustrophobic. I had to turn sideways to squeeze through, my chest scraping against the stone, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The darkness was absolute. Our flashlights seemed pathetic, weak little circles of light swallowed by the immensity of the black. But there was something else, a sound, a faint, low humming, like distant music, the sound of moving water. We followed it. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers, sometimes narrowing so much we had to exhale to fit through. It was terrifying. Part of me wanted to turn back, to give up, to accept Victor's offer and leave this mountain forever. But I thought of our grandfather. I thought of his years of solitude, his sacrifice, his unwavering love. I thought of the letter, the journals, the map he had drawn with shaking hands. After what felt like hours, the passage began to widen. The sound of water grew louder, a steady, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. And then we emerged into the heart. I stopped. I couldn't help it. The sight before me stole the breath from my lungs. We were standing in a vast cavern, bigger than any we had seen. An underground river flowed through the center, its water so clear it was almost invisible. The river had carved the chamber into a stunning gallery of rock formations, pillars and arches, and cascading falls of stone. But that wasn't what made me gasp. The walls of the cavern were glittering. I held up my flashlight, and the light fractured into 1,000 rainbows. The entire chamber was lined with crystals, huge, breathtaking geodes, some as big as I was, embedded in the walls. They were split open, revealing interiors of deep purple amethyst, smoky quartz, brilliant clear calcite. It was a treasure chamber, a natural cathedral of jewels. Jonah whispered something beside me. I couldn't hear him over the sound of the water, over the pounding of my own heart. This was it. This was our grandfather's secret. This was the real value of the land. It wasn't money, it wasn't evidence, it was this impossible hidden beauty. We walked through the chamber like pilgrims in a holy place. The crystals caught our flashlight beams and threw them back in a dazzling display. Purple and white and clear, colors so pure they seemed to glow from within. At the far side of the chamber, tucked into an alcove above the waterline, we found his workspace. A small, dry area carved out of the rock. A workbench. Geological tools carefully cleaned and organized, several locked metal cases, and a key hanging on a nail above the bench with a simple tag attached. For Caleb and Jonah. I took down the key. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I opened the first case. Inside were specimens. Crystals from this chamber, but others too. Rare minerals, unique fossils, geological samples from all over the cave system. Each one was meticulously cleaned, cataloged, and labeled in our grandfather's careful handwriting. A lifetime of work, a lifetime of discovery. I opened the second case. More specimens, more labels, more evidence of a man who had loved this mountain and everything it contained. I opened the third case, a thick binder, not a journal, not a map, a legal document. I pulled it out and began to read. It was a comprehensive geological survey of the property, professional, thorough, complete with mineral assays, core samples, and assessments of value. The value was in the millions, and there was more. A deed to the full mineral rights of the property, purchased secretly by Ezra Thornton 15 years ago. He had outsmarted them, all of them. He had created official records that called the land worthless while secretly documenting its true value. He had hidden the evidence where no one would ever find it, and he had left it for us. Not just the treasure, the weapon we needed to protect it. I closed the binder. My hands were shaking now, but not from cold. Caleb? Jonah's voice was small, uncertain. I looked at my brother, at the crystals glittering around us, at the legacy our grandfather had spent his life building. We're going to be okay, I said. We're going to be more than okay. And for the first time since we left the group home, I believed it. The lawyer's name was Whitmore, James Whitmore. He had an office 2 towns over in a place called Cedar Point, far enough from Copper Falls to be outside the local network, close enough to know Montana law. Henry Dawson had recommended him. Old Jim's honest, he said, which is rare enough in lawyers, and he doesn't scare easy. We needed someone who didn't scare easy. The morning after we found the heart, we hiked down the mountain with the binder tucked inside my jacket, pressed against my chest like a shield. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I kept expecting Victor Hale to step out of the trees, to demand what we had found. But the forest was quiet, the road was empty. And 3 hours later, we were sitting in James Whitmore's office, watching his eyes get bigger and bigger as he read through our grandfather's documents. This is... He stopped, started again. Do you boys understand what you have here? I think so, I said. This property isn't worth a few $1,000s. It's worth millions. Possibly tens of millions, depending on the quality and accessibility of the mineral deposits. He set down the binder and looked at us over his glasses. And you have clear title to all of it. Your grandfather made sure of that. So what do we do? Whitmore leaned back in his chair. First, we protect it. I'm going to have copies made of everything, stored in multiple locations. Then we send a certified letter to Ridgemont Holdings informing them of your documented rights and demanding they cease all attempts to acquire the property. Will that stop them? It'll give them pause. They were hoping you were ignorant, that you'd sell without knowing what you had. Now they know you're not. That changes the game. He paused, studying us with a thoughtfulness that felt different from the cold appraisal we'd received from Victor Hale. There's something else you should know, he said slowly. I did some research after Henry called me. Ridgemont Holdings isn't just a development company. They have connections to some unsavory people, the kind of people who don't like loose ends. My heart began to pound. The people who killed our parents. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. You know about that? Our grandfather told us, in his letter. He said they were still looking. The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was grave. Then we need to be very careful. These aren't people who give up easily, and they've had years to build their networks, their influence. Taking them on won't be simple. What do you suggest? We document everything, every contact, every threat, every suspicious incident. We build a case, and when the time is right, we take it to the authorities. We sent the cease and desist letter to Ridgemont Holdings 3 days later. A week passed, then two. The letter remained unanswered. Victor Hale didn't return to Copper Falls. The men in suits stopped asking questions. For a little while, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, we had won. We should have known better. I found him in the cave. It was past midnight. Jonah and I had fallen asleep in our tent on the plateau, exhausted from another day of exploration and documentation. We were mapping the heart, cataloging the crystals, building our own record of everything our grandfather had found. Something woke me, a sound that didn't belong, a scrape of rock, a muffled curse. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of the tent. The night air was cold, sharp with the smell of pine and approaching rain. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and there was a light in the cave, a faint glow, moving deep within the darkness. Someone was inside. I crept toward the entrance, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I should have woken Jonah. I should have gone for help. But there wasn't time. If they found the heart, if they found what our grandfather had hidden. I slipped into the cave and followed the light. It took me 20 minutes to reach the collapsed tunnel. The light was coming from beyond it, from the fissure that led to the heart. Someone had found our path. I squeezed through the crack, moving as quietly as I could. The passage felt tighter than before, the darkness more oppressive. I could hear sounds ahead, movement, the scrape of metal on stone. I emerged into the heart and found Garrett standing in the middle of the chamber, a crowbar in his hand. He was alone. His flashlight was propped on a rock, casting harsh shadows on the crystal walls. He had found the alcove. He had found the workbench. He was prying open the metal cases, throwing their contents onto the ground. "Looking for something?" I said. He spun around, the crowbar raised. When he saw me, a slow smile spread across his face. "The Thornton boy, come to check on your treasure." "Get out!" He laughed. It echoed off the crystals, harsh and ugly. "Or what? You'll call the police? By the time they get here, I'll be gone. And so will your evidence. We have copies. Everything's documented." "Not everything." He turned back to the alcove, dismissing me. "Mr. Hale knows about your little binder. Very impressive work, by the way. But you missed something. Your grandfather kept records, not just of the minerals, of the people who killed your parents. Names, dates, transactions. That's what we're looking for." A cold knot formed in my stomach. There's no such thing. Your grandfather was a smart man, smart enough to hide his grandsons for 12 years, smart enough to document the real value of this property while telling everyone it was worthless, and definitely smart enough to keep insurance. He moved to the next case, forcing the lock with a practiced efficiency that told me he had done this before. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Where did he hide it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Garrett turned to face me. The smile was gone. In its place was something cold, something dangerous. "Let me explain the situation. Mr. Hale doesn't like loose ends. Your grandfather was a loose end. Your parents were loose ends. And now you and your brother are loose ends." He took a step toward me, the crowbar gleaming in his hand. "But if you give us what we want, maybe we can work something out. You walk away, you take your brother and you disappear. Go somewhere warm. Start over. And if we don't, then we're going to have a problem." I looked around the chamber, the crystals, the river, the alcove where my grandfather had spent years building his legacy. I thought about running. I thought about fighting. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. And then I heard it, a sound behind Garrett, a scrape of rock, a whispered breath. Jonah. My brother had followed me. He was in the passage, waiting, watching. I made a decision. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'll show you, but you have to promise to leave us alone." Garrett studied me for a long moment, trying to decide if I was lying. Finally, he nodded. "Show me." I turned and walked toward the passage, away from the alcove, away from the cases and the binder and everything that mattered. This way, I said. There's another chamber. Deeper. That's where he kept the important things. Garrett followed, just like I knew he would. We squeezed through the fissure, back into the narrow passage that led to the heart. In the tight space, Garrett's crowbar was useless. He had to move slowly, carefully, his flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. I waited until he was fully inside the passage. Then I gave the signal. Jonah dropped the rock. It wasn't big, maybe 20 pounds, but in the confined space it was enough. It caught Garrett in the shoulder, knocking him off balance. He stumbled, cursed, dropped his flashlight, but he was fast. Faster than I expected. His hand shot out in the darkness and caught Jonah's ankle. My brother screamed. I didn't think. I grabbed the nearest loose stone and brought it down on Garrett's wrist. He howled, releasing his grip. Jonah scrambled backward, blood running from scrapes on his palms and knees where he'd hit the rough stone. Go! I shouted. Go! 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 We ran. Behind us, Garrett's curses echoed through the passage, but we didn't look back. We emerged from the cave into the cold night air and kept running, down the mountain, toward town, toward safety. Halfway down, we met them coming up. Henry Dawson, Earl from the hardware store, Maeve's husband's brother, a man named Roy who had a rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind them, the flashing lights of a sheriff's car. Garrett, I gasped. In the cave. He was trying to steal. Henry held up a hand. We know. Maeve saw his truck on the old logging road. Called everybody. Sheriff Martinez sent 2 deputies up to the cave while she took our statements. An hour later, they radioed back. Garrett had tried to escape through a different passage, one that led to the eastern slope. He made it halfway down before the terrain became impassable in the dark. They found him wedged between 2 boulders, his ankle twisted, cursing and threatening lawsuits. He wasn't threatening anything by the time they brought him down in handcuffs. It took 3 hours to explain everything. We sat in the sheriff's office in Copper Falls, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee, and told Sheriff Martinez everything. The inheritance, the letters, the cave, Victor Hale and Ridgemont Holdings, the connection to our parents' death. By the time we finished, the sun was coming up, and Sheriff Martinez was on the phone with the state attorney general. When they searched Garrett's truck, they found tools for forced entry, a list of geological terms and locations copied from somewhere, and a phone with text messages from Victor Hale. The messages were very specific. Find the records. Destroy anything connecting RH to the Thornton case. Use whatever means necessary. This is enough to open an investigation, Sheriff Martinez said. A real one. Into Ridgemont Holdings, into Victor Hale, and into what happened to your parents 12 years ago. I looked at Jonah. He was exhausted, pale, his palms wrapped in bandages where he'd scraped them on the rocks. But there was something else in his eyes, something that might have been hope. Will they be punished? He asked. The people who killed Mom and Dad? Sheriff Martinez was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but honest. I can't promise that. It's been a long time. Trails go cold. Witnesses disappear. But I can promise that we'll try. And with the evidence your grandfather left behind, we have a real shot. She was as good as her word. Over the following months, the investigation expanded. State police, federal agents, lawyers with badges and subpoenas who descended on Ridgemont Holdings like a storm. Victor Hale was arrested trying to board a plane to Mexico. Garrett turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. And buried in the files and records of Ridgemont Holdings, investigators found what our grandfather had always suspected. A paper trail linking the company to the criminal syndicate that had employed our father. Payments, cover-ups, and a memo dated 12 years ago authorizing the elimination of a problem called Nathan Thornton. Our father wasn't a criminal. He was a whistleblower, a man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. And our mother, Rosemary, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. A woman who loved her husband, loved her sons, and died because of someone else's greed. They held a memorial service in Copper Falls. The whole town came. People who had never met our parents, but who felt somehow that they knew them, that they were part of the story. Maeve made enough food to feed an army. Henry told stories about our grandfather, about the quiet, stubborn man who had loved this mountain and the grandsons he couldn't hold. Earl brought flowers from his garden. We stood at the front of the little church, Jonah and I, and listened to the pastor speak about love and loss and the mysteries of family. And when it was over, when the last prayers had been said and the last hands had been shaken, we walked out into the afternoon sun and did something we had been putting off. We went to say goodbye. The cemetery was at the edge of town, a small, peaceful place surrounded by pine trees. Our grandfather's grave was near the back, under an old oak tree that had stood for 100 years. The headstone was simple, gray granite, polished smooth, his name, his dates, and a single line, carved deep into the stone. The truth is in the stone. We stood there for a long time, the autumn wind stirring the dry grass around us. Finally, I pulled out a letter. One we had written together the night before, sitting at the kitchen table in Maeve's diner, struggling to find the right words. I read it aloud. Dear Grandpa Ezra, we don't know if you can hear us. We don't know if there's anything after this, any place where the people we've lost can watch over us. But we hope there is. We hope you're there. We found everything you left for us. The cave, the journals, the truth about Mom and Dad. We understand now. We understand why you did what you did. You didn't abandon us. You saved us. You gave up everything, your family, your peace, your chance to know us so that we could live, so that we could be safe. We're safe now. We're home. The men who killed our parents are going to prison. The land is protected, and we're going to stay here, on this mountain, and take care of it the way you did. We're going to make you proud. We love you. We always will. Your grandsons, Caleb and Jonah. My voice broke on the last words. Jonah was crying openly, tears streaming down his face. I folded the letter and placed it at the base of the headstone, weighing it down with a small piece of amethyst from the heart. Goodbye, Grandpa, Jonah whispered. Thank you for everything. We stood there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then we turned and walked back toward town, toward the mountain, toward home. It took 6 months to build the cabin, but we didn't build it alone. The first day we broke ground, Henry Dawson showed up with his truck full of lumber. Ezra helped me rebuild my barn in '94, he said. This is me returning the favor. By noon, there were 12 people on the plateau. Earl brought tools. Roy brought his sons. Maeve brought enough food to feed an army, setting up a makeshift kitchen under a blue tarp. What is this? I asked, overwhelmed by the sudden crowd. Maeve smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. This is Copper Falls, honey. We take care of our own. Over the following months, more people came. The pastor and his wife, the woman who ran the post office, teenagers looking for summer work, old men who had known our grandfather and wanted to honor his memory. They taught us how to frame walls, how to lay foundations, how to run plumbing and wire electricity. They shared meals with us, told us stories about the town, asked about our plans for the future. By the time the cabin was finished, we weren't just homeowners. We were neighbors. We were community members. We were family. I remember the day we hung the front door. Henry stood back, hands on his hips, surveying our work. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. You boys turned out all right. It was the highest compliment I had ever received. The cabin sat on the plateau not far from the entrance to the cave. It was small but solid, with thick walls and a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out over the valley below. We ran solar panels for electricity and collected rainwater in barrels and planted a garden in the rocky soil. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The cave we left alone. We sealed the heart, protecting it from anyone who might try to exploit it. The crystals would stay where they were, hidden and beautiful, a secret cathedral of jewels that only we knew about. Our grandfather's legacy, our inheritance. People came from all over to study the geological formations. Scientists, researchers, people who spent their lives understanding the language of stone. We welcomed them, showed them what we could, kept the rest private. The investigation into our parents' deaths took 2 years. In the end, 3 executives from Ridgemont Holdings were convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. Victor Hale got 15 years. Others got more. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was justice, however imperfect. And slowly, painfully, we began to heal. I learned to let go of the anger. Jonah learned to trust again. We made friends in Copper Falls. Real friends. People who knew our story and accepted us anyway. Henry Dawson became like a grandfather to us, filling the space that Ezra never could. Maeve fed us until we complained about gaining weight. We became part of the community, part of the family. I finished high school through an online program and started taking college courses in geology. Jonah discovered he had a gift for art. He spent hours sketching the crystals, the cave formations, the mountains that surrounded our home. His drawings were beautiful, full of light and shadow and a deep understanding of the natural world. Sometimes late at night, I would go back to the heart. I would turn off my flashlight and sit in the darkness, and listening to the sound of the underground river. And I would talk to our grandfather, tell him about our lives, our dreams, our plans for the future. I liked to think he could hear me, somewhere beyond the stone, beyond the darkness, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next. I liked to think he was proud. The night we finished the cabin, Jonah and I hiked up to the heart one last time. We sat in the crystal chamber, our flashlights off, listening to the eternal song of the underground river. The darkness was absolute, but it didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt like home. Caleb, Jonah's voice was soft in the blackness. Yeah? They told us we inherited a worthless basalt cave. I smiled in the darkness. I knew where this was going. Yeah, I said, they did. They were wrong. Yeah, they were. We sat in silence for a while longer. Two brothers in the heart of a mountain, surrounded by treasures no one else would ever see. Then we turned on our flashlights and walked back out into the world. One evening, about a year after we had finished the cabin, Jonah and I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. It was autumn. The aspens had turned gold and orange, and the air was crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. The sky was a canvas of color, red and purple and pink, stretching from horizon to horizon. Do you ever think about them? Jonah asked. Mom and Dad? I nodded. Every day. I can't remember their faces. I try, but it's just blank. Like looking at a photograph that's been left in the sun too long. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small worn photograph. It was one of the things we had found in our grandfather's cases, tucked away with his specimens and documents. A young couple smiling at the camera. The man had Jonah's dark hair. The woman had my eyes. Between them, two small boys, one in overalls, one in a striped shirt. That's them, I said. That's us. Jonah took the photograph. His fingers traced the edges, the faces, the smiles. We look happy, he said. We were. I don't remember it, but we were. We sat in silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. The first stars were appearing, faint pinpricks of light in the gathering darkness. Do you think they know? Jonah asked. About everything that happened. About us finding the cave, and Victor going to prison, and the cabin? I don't know. Maybe. I hope so. He set the photograph on the arm of his chair, propping it up so our parents could see the sunset. I hope they can see that we're okay. I put my arm around my brother's shoulders. He leaned into me, the way he had when we were children in the group home, scared and alone and clinging to the only constant in a world of endless change. They know, I said. I'm sure of it. The stars grew brighter as the darkness deepened. Somewhere in the cave below us, the underground river flowed on, patient and eternal. The crystals glittered in the absolute darkness, waiting for the light that would eventually return. An inheritance isn't about money. It isn't about property or mineral rights or geological surveys. An inheritance is the story you're given, the legacy you're trusted with, the love that reaches across years and miles and even death itself. Our grandfather didn't leave us wealth. He left us worth. He left us a home in the most unexpected of places. He left us a second chance, a life we could build with our own two hands. He left us each other. The cave didn't save us from poverty. It saved us from the lie that we were alone and unwanted. It taught us that sometimes the things the world dismisses as empty and worthless are actually the places where the real treasure is hidden. You just have to be brave enough to step inside and turn on the light. And that brings us to the end of our story. But maybe it's the beginning of a conversation for you. What did this story teach you about family, about inheritance, about the things that really matter? I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever inherited something that seemed worthless but turned out to be priceless? Have you ever found your home in a place no one else could see the value in? Your stories matter. You matter. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel. We share stories about hope, about second chances, about finding family in the most unexpected places. We're building a community of people who understand that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best destinations. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this family. Until next time.